John MacKay, and with Extracting the Best from Every Day with Dr. John MacKay, and having a podcast and talking with innovators and other people in the industry as far as natural products and all modes of extraction and analytical testing. And with me today is Mr. Eric Kawka from Cattis Science up in the nowhere in Vermont, and being able to speak about some of the things that he's doing and some of his impressions of extraction. So welcome, Eric.
Good morning, Dr. MacKay. Thank you for having me.
It looks like you have a whole bunch of equipment in the background there. That seems encouraging. Means that you still have a business and the roof hasn't caved in Vermont.
The wheels are still rolling.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and Cattis as a research organization up in Vermont.
Yeah, so we're an R&D company where we focus our efforts on optimizing and really broadening our understanding of utilizing what we refer to as SFX technology and how that relates to extraction and purification of natural products. And so when I refer to SFX technology, I'm referring to supercritical fluid extraction, SFE, supercritical fluid chromatography, SFC, both on the analytical and preparative scale, as well as other techniques such as countercurrent chromatography, utilizing CO2 as an anti-solvent for particle engineering, and also rapid expansion of CO2, once again, for particle formation.
That's pretty interesting. That's a lot of a mouthful, but
yes.
Maybe a couple of things, because I think most people are familiar, believe they're familiar with the extraction side, but that's just one piece of it, and just using CO2 by itself. And are there other modes for even from the extraction side before you branch out into some of the other things?
Yeah, CO2 is a very flexible solvent, right? As many people know, by simple modifications of pressure or temperature, right? One could change the density of CO2, which affects the solvency of that solvent, right? And so why is it good for natural products? Well, for example, cannabis. The plant makes 500 plus different compounds. These compounds, of course, can be grouped into different classes, such as flavonoids, terpenoids, cannabinoids. And as you focus in on as a whole, or focus in on these classes, we know that THCA is totally different than THC. Alpha pinene is totally different than beta carotene. And alpha pinene is definitely different than CBD, right? And so how could one pick one solvent to extract and maintain the integrity of these classes of compounds? That's really difficult, right? And so with CO2, now we're given the ability to manipulate the properties of CO2 to get preference on different classes of compounds. So on the extraction side, it makes a great solvent for that. Of course, you could add different modifiers to CO2 to further manipulate the properties. And then on the chromatography side, it's equally as beneficial, where now all of a sudden we have a non-polar solvent that we don't have to evaporate on the back end. So it's definitely a nice technology for natural products.
So when you say non-polar solvents, what other kind of solvents besides CO2 are non-polar?
Hexane, right? Any kind of large hydrocarbon, hexane, pentane. So as you kind of move up the carbon chain, that solvent typically becomes more non-polar, right? Now with CO2, right? Neat CO2 is nonpolar, and it kind of behaves like hexane, but one can manipulate temperature and pressure, right? Or add a little modifier, say ethanol, to adjust that polarity to make it more polar, right? To access a different suite of compounds.
So there's a lot of work that's done on natural products with CO2 plus methanol or ethanol, ethyl acetate, and different percentages of those versus the amount of CO2. So I'm supposing within your research, you're talking with customers that are wanting something to know all the compounds that are in there, and then other customers or those customers transitioning to how do I make this into something that I can use. So you're probably not going to use methanol most of the time. You're going to use ethanol for something that's a little more safer. I'll say safer on the side.
Yeah, it depends on what class of compounds you're going after. For example, if we're really interested in terpenoids derived from cannabis, right? Well, we wouldn't use any co-solvent there because we have to remove that co-solvent, right? And sometimes if you have ethanol with certain volatile terpenes, you'll remove the ethanol, but you'll also remove those volatile terpenes, right? So that really doesn't make sense. So it really depends on what you're going after, the solubility of those compounds. And then you act accordingly on the front end of dialing in the proper parameters of CO2 and modifier if needed.
So I'm visiting the Emerald Conference this week, and I remember it was 2019 that you gave a presentation with the different monoterpenes versus the sesquiterpenes out here. So that was interesting, in the fact that most people feel like you can't do that with CO2, but you kind of did that in front of a large audience saying, well, if I can't, then why did I?
Yeah, one of the biggest myths out there is, CO2 cannot, you can't extract terpenes with CO2. And that, as we know now, that's completely false. And, in terms of terpenoids, they're really easy to extract. They're hard to capture. That's a problem. Can we capture the terpenes, right?
Yeah.
And yes, through that work, we've demonstrated indeed we not only can extract them, we can get preference, right? Within the family of terpenoids, we get preference of monoterpenes over sesquiterpenes, etc. And we developed a really nice methodology for capturing those volatile species. So yeah,
that's
I
published
think,
work.
And that's yep. And you can search for that online, and we'll provide a link on the podcast here that folks could go and read more about that.
When I'm looking at extraction and all the other tools you have, so I do pontificate on good is not a number. And I can see from the background there that you have a significant number of, I'll call them toys, but I know they're tools. I know they're instruments. So what do you have in the background there as far as, I can see there's a liquid chromatograph for sure. I can see there's a ultra performance, supercritical. I see there's gas. What else have you got back there?
Yeah, so we have a UPLC with a mass spec on that guy, a PDA okay. And mass spectrometry. We have a UPC squared, so that's SFC based, CO2 based. Okay. Equipped with a PDA, also let's see, I got an evaporative light scattering detector. I was blanking on that. We have a GCMS, so for measuring volatiles, also equipped with a mass spec on that. So yeah, a lot of tools. The more tools you could put in your analytical toolbox, the faster you could solve a problem when it comes to natural products and the constituents of a natural product.
Is there also a flash back behind there?
And we also have flash chromatography, and then also a semi-prep SFC system that could be, and also a preparative SFC system. And so when we built the lab, we built our lab where we focus on natural products. Cannabis, of course, is one example of a natural products. But for example, right now we have a project looking at cannabinoids from cannabis and entheogens from mushrooms, right? And of course, if you're analyzing THC from cannabis or psilocybin from mushrooms, well, the technology used for THC doesn't translate directly to psilocybin from mushrooms, right? Or the methods that we developed to analyze THC definitely doesn't translate to psilocybin. So once again, the more tools we have in our toolbox, the easier that job becomes. And so that's why we kind of, as we are building our laboratory, we're looking at, different means of separation, different means of getting visibility on that separation through detection. So that's why we invest in a wide array of instrumentation.
So when I'm looking at a research project, you're not starting off with 10 pounds of material. So you start off with something that's, a small 5 milliliter, and then do some of the original work on that, and then moving to 100 milliliter, then moving to a 250, and then moving to a 5 liter, and then the same thing capturing each one of those components so that you can capture an extraction in line, like at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 11 minutes, whatever along that process, and then analyze them through the analytical tools to know when different compounds are coming off or what the concentration of those are at time t. So you can do kinetics and isolation.
Absolutely, right? It's understanding the matrix, right? And technology, how the technology will affect the matrix on a small scale, right? Learning a lot from that. And then scaling that, right, to more of an industrial process. And now all of a sudden that gives you the ability to really understand all the variables that go into that extraction, right? And a lot of times, if we're talking about extraction, at least, it's how do we pull out the stuff that we want, but leave behind the stuff that we don't want, so we don't have to, post-process that, right? And so the more understanding, the more work that goes on the bench level, the benchtop instrumentation, right? The 5 ml vessel. And as we scale that, of course, there's always problems in scaling, right? And each time you solve a problem in scaling, you gain even more information about that process. So by the time you go to an industrial scale, facility and scale up that method, you know exactly what to anticipate.
So when you're looking at that, I would also say that it's also the column that you're using and the detector that you're using that's appropriate. So if you're looking for things that don't have a UV chromophore, then you would be using evaporative light scattering as a detection.
So, yep. So on the chromatography side, right, half the battle is identifying the proper station, what we would call the stationary phase, right?
Yeah.
And it's all fit for purpose, really. What's the end goal? Is the goal to scale it to, isolating a constituent at tens to hundreds kilograms per day, or is it strictly analytical, right? And that those are two different animals, and their decision making is different. But like I said, your first goal is to identify the proper media that gives you the resolution, what we would call the resolution between constituents. And then the back end, right, of that is detection. We have to see that we're actually separating out these compounds. And like you said, some compounds have a chromophore. You could use PDA, photodiode array detection, right? However, if we're looking at a terpenoid, alpha pinene, it really doesn't have much UV absorbance, right? So perhaps PDA is not the best tool that we have to get visibility on compound. We'll go to evaporative light scattering or FID, flame ionization detection, right? So it's all fit for purpose depending on what constituent you're purifying, what constituent you're extracting.
So with all these different toys and all these different things at your availability, and you're sitting in Vermont, because I know that it's not snowing there, besides about 15 inches or so. So of your typical customers, what kind of problems are you able to solve?
Yeah, so a lot of our clients, we're in the cannabis space looking at, identifying, say, minor constituents of a matrix. With the Farm Bill, with multiple derivatives of cannabinoids now being sold into the marketplace, looking at, especially where folks are taking, say, CBD isolate and manipulating that through, heat degradation or acid catalyte, whatever the method is to create a different cannabinoid. Of course, there's minor constituents that are being made, minor products, right? And so looking at the minor products, isolating minor products to get full, characterization on that to make sure that, the end product's actually safe to sell, right? So a lot of work like that. Now a new kind of, space that we're really looking into and are doing some work in is within entheogens from, like as I mentioned earlier, from mushrooms. So yeah, it's all about identifying what's in that matrix and helping these groups characterize impurities, or helping groups find activity, bioactivity within certain fractions of the matrix. So we helped on the extraction and the purification side of those projects.
So when I'm looking at some of the more recent work before we were on camera, and that is chiral. What is chiral and who cares? I mean, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so chiral, basically, the classic example you hear are your hands, right? A hand, your right hand, it looks like your left hand, right? But you put them together, they're mirror images, right? So they're different. They're both hands, right?
Yeah.
But they're different, right?
Yeah.
And so in chemistry, compounds can have the same molecular weight, the same makeup, right? However, in 3D space, that compound's different. Say a hydrogen, right? Here's a plane, either it's coming at me or it's coming towards you, John, right? And all of a sudden, these two compounds are different, right? And so when it comes to, extracting the natural product, is it of concern? Yeah, yes, but not, we're not on high alert, right? But now, once again, once we get to manipulation of compound A into compound B, right? Well, we're moving away from, a natural product. Now we're becoming, synthetic, semi-synthetic analog of your starting material, right? And now that's when the fun chemistry happens. The conversion, right? If there's a chiral center, right? Well, you really don't know what the major product will be. Usually, typically, it's the more stable product, right? But then again, you can get a receiving mixture, a mixture of different products. And historically, typically in the pharmaceutical world, one isomer can be great and cure whatever element that it's set out to cure, while the other isomer may actually cause harm, right? And so without having the proper, toxicity studies and pharmacology on these minor byproducts from a chemical transformation, right, of CBD to a different minor cannabinoids, well, that becomes very important, looking at the different enantiomers and getting visibility on that.
So looking at all those things, and I have another question along the way, because there's obviously a lot of toys in the lab and it's taken a while to accumulate the toys, but how did you get to this route? So I'm going to say, let's say you're a high school student in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, which I think is redundant, except for Philadelphia. And then how did you get here? Because that's 20 years, right? So what happened in the last 20 years that got you to this place?
Oh, John, it hasn't been 20 years. More like, I'm not that old. It's like 10, 12 years, right? 13 maybe. So yeah, I graduated my master's program in synthetic organic chemistry in 2013. And of course, my last year of school, I had to make decisions of what I wanted to do after grad school. And I really, contemplated pursuing a PhD program in synthetic organic chemistry. I really liked that type of work, and I was pretty good at it. But really thinking about that step and the time investment of pursuing such program and the dividends on the back end, I really didn't see that as a good fit for me. And that decision was strictly based on me and where I was at that time. So I didn't pursue a PhD. I contemplated on pursuing an MBA, but ultimately ended up opening up a restaurant in my hometown of Honesdale, Pennsylvania. And not to spend too much time on this, Honesdale is a small town in northeastern PA, 2.5 hours from New York City, 3 hours from Philadelphia. The population during the summer probably doubles with tourism. One thing the town didn't have was a nice place for folks to enjoy a nice meal and beverage. And so overall, the project was really successful. But during that time, I always kept a close eye on cannabis and what cannabis was doing in states like Colorado and California. And in 2015, I attended the Emerald Conference. Met a lot of great folks, through the conference, and went back to Pennsylvania, and kind of strategically end of 2015, we got an offer from a group to purchase a restaurant project. And it was a favorable deal for us. And so we executed that deal early 2016. And a month after closing, I jumped into a car and headed to California. And so I knew I wanted to work with cannabis. I knew I wanted to be innovative within the field of cannabis.
Yeah.
And, if you want to be innovative, you have to surround yourself around innovative people within the field. And, back then, and even I would argue today, California is probably the innovative, hub of cannabis. And so, by leveraging my contacts that I made at the Emerald Conference and fostering those relationships throughout 15, I jumped right into it in California, hooked up with an early startup, and we rented a warehouse space in Irvine, California, and went to work. So that's how I started working with cannabis. And then eventually migrated back to the East Coast, hooked up with a group in Vermont where they were launching a preclinical study on various cannabinoid treatments for pain mitigation. And so we were hired, or I was hired to develop their chemistry program. And so brought my knowledge that I developed, with CO2-based technologies in California, brought that to Vermont, started working a lot with semi-preparative supercritical fluid chromatography. And then, so that brings us to like 2018, 2019 with the Farm Bill now being passed. And we just saw a lot of opportunity that bill presented, and really the pitfalls, by being involved with cannabis, looking at the pitfalls of the THC market, we had some good ideas of how we could help the CBD market. And that's what kind of drives me to launch Cattis. And we were in Vermont already. Vermont's a pretty cool state. So we decided to stay in Vermont and launch Cattis Scientific.
I think that's what you do, is you just take the alphabet, you scramble it up, and whatever doesn't fit
mix
on
them up, throw it out.
Whatever doesn't fit on the Scrabble board, you just say, whatever we're getting for the letters, we'll use the first 6, and we'll keep the 7th off to the side. I think that's
you got it. Yeah.
That's how I typically name most of my companies. So anyhow, thanks for your time. Appreciate it, and good luck with everything. What's your so on the parting side? What's your next exciting project that you see coming up? The future. Yeah,
so we have so Vermont just adopted recreational. So on the personal side, at least, Vermont adopted drafted regulations for adult use. So that's very exciting for us to hopefully we can participate in that market. And we have some unique formulations that we've been working on that are all driven by CO2 that we plan on hopefully releasing in Vermont. But as an industry as a whole, there's a lot of great innovation going on. The Farm Bill really opened up the path to these minor cannabinoids, and really looking at different minor cannabinoids and how they react within our bodies, and the pharmacology of those cannabinoids. How does one access these minor cannabinoids in bulk? There's a lot of great, bioenzymatic type strategies that are being implemented that's really interesting. And then more on the recreational, adult use THC side is, how do we, interest of ours, how do we, use our technology to mimic the profile of the plant in the oil form, right? And I don't know if the proper terminology is full spectrum or not, but how do we take the best attributes of the flower and preserve those attributes in an oil form, right? So we've been doing a lot of work, around that.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So we'll have to somehow get you onto the CBD Expo, get you onto a platform and on a few panels and stuff, and be able to answer people's questions, which is pretty exciting to be focused on the science side. But I don't know if we actually started it off with coffee with cannabis.
Coffee with cannabis.
Or coffee with chemists, either way. But appreciate your time and spending time with me, and we'll catch you on the next time around. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.